So, good morning, Berlin. So, the third day of Cisco Live. I hope it's been interesting, new, fun for you guys. So, how is the feedback? Is it good? Did you like it? Is it like new stuff, interesting stuff? So far, so good?
Are you like me, incredibly impressed by the beer in Germany? There's a lot of good stuff over there, but man, there's good beer here.
Yeah, so the first thing that excited me was like Cisco Live Berlin is like the German beer. Yeah, absolutely.
When I got here, I was as thin as him.
Yeah, that's why I can think about it. Right. Okay, so let's get started. My name is Abhijit Dey. I'm a TME for Collaboration Technology Group, and I'm based in Bangalore, India, and I focus on on-prem conferencing. And with me, I have Albert Ampra, and he's based in San Jose. He's at TME as well. Correct. And I would like to him to introduce him.
My name is, he did a great job of my name. That one's usually kind of hard to pronounce, but my name's Albert Amparan. I'm originally from Texas, and I moved to San Jose, California about 15 years ago. I've been with Cisco now for going on 8 years, and as Abhijit mentioned for himself, I'm the CTG conferencing TME. We focus pretty closely on the CMS product line.
Right. So today we'll be talking on the on-prem conferencing. We are not talking anything on WebEx or Spark. We do have separate sessions for that. And before we start the session, we would like you to have a look at these sessions as well. So we think that these sessions might be interesting, more informative, and in detail of certain topics that we'll be just talking about, because we have just 2 hours and we're talking about the whole of on-prem conferencing. We might not be able to get into detail. Apart from that, we do have Spark rooms created for this particular session. So we would request you to download Spark if you have not already and join this session so that we can have further questions in the Spark room. So the Spark room will be open for 2 weeks after this session, and we can have discussions even when the Cisco Live is done. So let's go over the agenda. So today we'll be talking about, first is the portfolio. There has been a lot of changes in the Cisco conferencing portfolio. We do have some old boxes, new boxes. What is it that the Cisco focusing on right now? And if you have the old boxes, should we think about them? Should we think of migrating? Things like that. Then we'll talk about the video architecture in a whole and where this presentation will be focusing on. The next we'll be talking about Cisco Meeting Server. So how many of you have not heard about Cisco Meeting Server?
Yeah, we're very
popular. Okay, so that's good. Because
how many of you still call it the Acano server? Let's not do that anymore.
So last year when we did the Cisco Live, it was just a month after we acquired Acano, and it was like, okay, so we have something new now. So it's good that this year everyone knows what Cisco Meeting Server is. Now, since we acquired Acano, there are so many improvements that we have made in the software, and we'll talk about all the new that we have in the latest releases, and maybe a little bit of insight on what the next is going to be. Then we'll talk about an important topic, Microsoft Interop. What are the improvements that we have added? What is the correct architecture that we support? Then we'll go into scheduling. Migration, if you have customers who are on old hardware, should they migrate? What do they lose? What do they gain? And all that information. And the last and the most interesting, licensing. So let's get started.
And I will be sitting off to the side here to leave you in great hands with Abhijit.
Yeah, so if you come and ask Cisco, what is the first recommendation for conferencing? So the answer would be, try to think about the cloud. Now I just said that we are talking only about the on-prem, so why am I talking about the cloud? It's easy for us to roll out features if it is a cloud-based deployment. It's easy for the customer because there is less management and less administration from the customer. But we do understand that cloud is not going to be the solution for each and every requirement, and that's why we have the session. But like I said, if you come and ask us, what is the first recommendation? Go cloud. Now, what's the second recommendation if I have an on-prem requirement? So as we all know, we just acquired, we acquired Acano, and it's called Cisco Meeting Server now. So that's the primary platform that we always recommend to the customers. It does most of the scenarios that the customers expect. But again, there are certain scenarios that cannot be done using a Cisco Meeting Server, and those scenarios are, for example, CMR. If a customer is already used to CMR, and if a customer already has an integration with the WebEx, these are the scenarios that are not supported on Cisco Meeting Server, and there is no plan to have this scenario to support in the Cisco Meeting Server. Apart from that, there is a feature multi-streaming, which is so many Cisco endpoints that support SVC can make use of this particular feature. And if they are a dual display or a triple display, then basically they can have multiple participants in different displays. This feature is not supported today on Cisco Meeting Server, but we are planning to have this support in the next release. Before we start, I just wanted to make sure that there has been some recent announcements for the end of sale, which is like the hardwares and the licensing. So if you are not aware of that, I'll definitely talk about that. But in case if you're not aware of that, I would say please go to cisco.com and make sure that you understand the end of license notices. So before, like maybe a couple of months back, we had so many hardware options. We had an MSE chassis, which I think we have from last 15 years or so. Then we have the recent acquisition boxes, which are the X1, X2, and X3 servers. Then we had the 5300 models, and then we had the MM400 series. So these were the hardwares that supported either MCU or TelePresence server. So we got rid of all these hardwares, and now the only hardware that we support is today CMS 1000, and sooner we are going to come up with something called CMS 2000. So anyone here who has not heard about CMS 2000? Okay, and as we speak, maybe we release it this week or the week next. So that's the reason I'm saying that today we have CMS 1000, which is again a virtualized environment, and we'll talk about a little bit detail in what the both appliances can do. The second, what we have is like different kind of licenses. We had port licenses, we had MCU licenses, we had TelePresence server licenses, we had conductor licenses, RMS licenses. So what do we want now? We are focusing only on multi-party plus licensing. So a few months back, we had multi-party plus licensing, and after we had Acano Cisco Meeting Server as part of the portfolio, we have come up with something called multi-party plus, which is PMP plus and SMP plus, which means apart from TelePresence server and conductor, you also support Cisco Meeting Server software. So you just buy a PMP plus or SMP plus, and you can install either of the hardwares. And for the different softwares, the only software that we recommend now is a Cisco Meeting Server, and this software has different modules, so you can choose to install different functionality. It's the same software, different configuration. And we have an additional desktop client that can be used to join the spaces. So in Cisco Meeting Server, every virtual meeting room is a space. We still use the TMS, which is for scheduling. We still haven't announced the end of sale for TelePresence server and conductor, but we have announced the end of sale for all the hardware that supports this. So what exactly is TelePresence Management Suite? So basically, this is the recommended scheduling platform from Cisco. It is a software that can be installed on a Windows server, and it is virtualized. We did have an appliance-based offering, but it's a virtualized offering only available now. If you already were a Cisco CTS Manager customer, or if you still are CTS Manager customer, then basically this is the product you should be migrating to. So TMS is not just one software, it's a suite of softwares. So the other softwares that we have is, first is TMS XC. So TMS has got its own scheduling platform, which is, it is a calendaring server. Now, for customers who already have Microsoft Exchange, we don't want them to leave that and migrate to something else or have two calendaring services in parallel. So what we have is something called TMS Exchange Integration Extension. What it does is it integrates your Exchange with the TMS. So either you schedule on TMS or you schedule on Exchange, it makes sure that both the servers have the same information. Next component is TMS XN, which is the same for Lotus Notes, but we have announced end of sale for this in November 2016, which is last year. But we still would be selling it till May, but just to make sure that we understand, it's going to be end of sale. There are so many customers who might not like the user interface of TMS, or they already are using something that they're more familiar with. So TMS BA offers APIs with which you can integrate your front-end portal with the TMS scheduling portal. So you put all the TMS scheduling intelligence on TMS and just use an external portal to display it to the users. The last component is TMS PE. This is basically provisioning extension. So if you are a VCS or Expressway customer, you would be needing this to provision your users. If you have a VCS find me configuration, then basically you would need TMS PE. And there is something that we added in TMS PE which we call Smart Scheduler. So this is a very lightweight GUI, easy to understand tool that we created on top of TMS PE. It's not a replacement, it's just that it's a different way for the management portal. So any questions before I move to the video architecture? Okay, good. So in video architecture, we are not going to talk about all the other components. So these are some sessions that we think might give you more insight of how the conferencing integrates with the other components, or maybe a little bit more on the other components. So how many of you are aware of Cisco preferred architecture? Okay, so this is one question, no matter where I ask in any audience, we have very few people who have the understanding of preferred architectures. So I'll introduce this concept again. So without preferred architecture and CVDs, we have SRNDs, and we have so many deployment guides, so many installation guides. So what we thought of, we tried to come up with different set of documents which are not 1,300 and 1,400 pages, and which are not 10 or 12 links. It's just a single document. It's less than 100 pages, and it talks about 80% of the deployments that our customers have. So there are two sets of documents. First is the PA overview, which talks about the pre-sales discussions. So for example, if you have a requirement and you want to know which components or whether Cisco components fit the need, you open this document and you understand this is what the 80% of deployment Cisco offers. So basically, this is a document that you need to have when you're talking to the customers trying to solve their needs. Now you already know what you have to buy, and you want to know how to configure them. So there are so many deployment guides. Every component has a deployment guide, and it gives everything about everything. But most of the times, you don't need to know everything when you do the first set of configurations. So we have something called Cisco Validated Designs. This has step-by-step configuration of all the components that you need for your system to come up and have a successful conference. We have different CVDs. There are CVDs for conferencing, there are CVDs for recording, there are CVDs for everything else. So based on your need, you can pick up. And then we have a third set of documents which is basically focused only a certain use case. For example, Unity connection. Right? So we have three different set of documents, and all these documents are either less than 100 or less than 150 pages, which is very easy to understand and would be a good document to start with. So if you have not had a chance to go through it, I would request you to please go to this link and have a look at the documents. This is the overall collaboration architecture. Nothing new. A minor change is we had TelePresence server and conductor in this box. Now it's replaced with CMS core. And apart from Cisco Expressway, we have an additional component called CMS Edge. So today's discussion is focused on the conferencing, scheduling, a little bit of Edge, and the call control and different call control scenarios. Okay. So Cisco Meeting Server. So Cisco Meeting Server is the same conference bridge for all audio conferencing, scalable audio conferencing, video-based conferencing, web-based conferencing. When I talk about web-based conferencing, which means I can join in from my desktop and I can even chat with the other participants in the same conference or in a different conference. I can also share my content. It doesn't matter whether I'm joining from video or web-based system. User experience. Now, we do have different kind of conferences, doesn't mean that the user experience has to be different. If I'm part of a video conference, I do understand what the icons mean if I join in from a web-based conferencing. So the user experience is absolutely same. It doesn't matter what kind of conference I'm joining it. The second is virtually limitless scale, which means we do have options. We can configure the CMS server in a way where I'll never get a call reject, even if I'm crossing the amount of ports that are supposed to be available. We can turn that on, we can turn that off, and I'll talk a little bit detail in that. Apart from that, when we add new servers, the experience is very same. We don't get a different experience just because I'm joining on a different conference bridge. So that's why we call it's like a virtually limitless scale. And the third is extensible design, which means we do have APIs that can configure and tweak each and every fine-tuning capability in a CMS server. So if we want to use a different portal or if we like using APIs to configure and maintain the box, everything can be managed in a CMS environment. Apart from that, we have an excellent integration with Microsoft Lync. Without CMS server, we used to have, so there was a need of a expressway or a VCS control, which acted as a link gateway. With the Cisco Meeting Server, I can interrupt directly with the conference bridge, which means I need less component, and which means it's easy for me to manage different devices. It's not just we support only Cisco conferencing. As long as we are talking about standard SIP and standard 323, we can have any participant, any video endpoint join the conference, and the experience is going to be same. So Cisco Meeting Server spaces. So every conference, every virtual meeting room in a CMS environment is called a space. So now this space can be the space used for a personal meeting room, or it can be used for an ad hoc call, which is like a point-to-point call escalated to a multi-point call, or it can be a scheduled call. It doesn't matter what kind of a conference it is always going to be a space. Now, if it is always going to be a space, which means I can have all the kind of conferencing that we discussed in the previous slide. So in the same space, I can have a web-based participant, I can have like a desktop client, or a video endpoint, or a third-party endpoint. So this picture just represents, in a single space, I can have different kind of conferences, different way to dial in, different vendors, and basically this is a desktop client, or I can have a WebRTC-based participant as well, which means I don't need a login for that person, I don't need a plugin for that person, I just need to have a browser that supports WebRTC, and I can be in the conference. So any questions on the basic understanding of CMS before we go to the platform options? Okay.
I haven't even started talking and I already broke my mic. Thank you, Abhijit. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the platform options. I noticed that everyone, for the most part, everyone had heard about the CMS 2000. And Abhijit was not exaggerating. This is coming out very soon. I mean, we are keeping an eye out so that we know. But I'll be touching base on the CMS 2000, what it is, and what you can do with it. So I got the impression that everyone is pretty much familiar with the CMS 1000. So I think that these numbers are not something that anyone is surprised by. Does everyone recognize these numbers? I mean, these pretty much fall in line with what you had thought the CMS 1000 did. For example, 96 full HD ports, 192 SD calls, 192 Skype for Business calls, and the 3,000 audio calls. So are those numbers that you're pretty familiar with? Any surprises there, any questions there? Okay, so CMS 1000 is a virtualized platform. We do sell it on that chassis right there. It supports SIP, can be trunked to CUCM or VCS. A point to make here, and it's something that people, we've got the World of Solutions, we have a booth over there. Something that people have asked me quite a bit yesterday was, does it have to be CUCM or VCS? We do prefer, of course, and would direct CUCM and VCS for what that can offer you, but we do support any standards-based SIP trunk. 323 is not directly supported, however, it would be supported by interworked, let's say, for example, through VCS. So now that is the CMS 2000 server. And we've got the note up here where it's coming soon. I mean, that is really coming soon. That should be available for sale at least within the next week or so, right, Abji? Yeah, it might be this afternoon. So what I do want to point out exactly what this is. So it's a 6RU chassis, and it's based on the 5108 with B2000 blades. Stop me here if I go through this too fast or if I say something that's not clear, because this is some pretty important information. Of course, it has high capacity, up to 500 HD calls. And when I say it's complementary to the CMS 1000, we'll talk about it a little bit later on, the different configuration footprints, the different architecture for CMS, and that is the CMS 1000, split nodes, single combined server, things like that. With the CMS 1000 chassis, all of it is completely complementary to the CMS 2000. And I'll show you what that means a little deeper later on. Important to note, it's bare metal platform. Think of it as an appliance. This is an appliance. This is meant to be thought of as an appliance. So to that end, again, as I said right now, think of it as an appliance. You cannot buy the chassis and then single blades and think, okay, I don't need all of those 500 ports. I'm just going to get 2 blades or 1 blade. You cannot buy it. It's all or nothing, fully populated, one appliance with all 8 blades completed in there, filled in there. It's a single unit. It does not use clustering within the box to get to that 500 ports. Again, this is one server. You can, of course, cluster it with other CMS 2000s. We'll talk a little bit about cascading and scale, but the CMS 2000 can be clustered to get up to a total of 4,000 calls with 8 servers clustered at 500 each. Are those numbers you have been familiar with? Have you heard about that, or did I say something right now that was either confusing or surprising there? No? Now, another point that I really want to make here. So we're talking about that chassis right there. And I kind of emphasized the fact that it was an appliance, a single box. It's not mix and match within itself. And I did say it was complementary to a CMS 1000. And what I mean by that is, as in these pictures up above, we've got clusters of CMS 2000s. Well, you can also cluster the CMS 2000 with CMS 1000s. There is no difference. It's software. One's on one platform, one's on the other. So as we talk about the architecture a little later on here, we'll be talking about single split server, multiple split server, or combined server deployments. Well, one can be a CMS 2000, one can be a CMS 1000, and of course, one can be the standards-based software platform. Is that clear? Is that confusing? I want to make sure I didn't confuse anyone on that. I tend to kind of breeze through that and talk pretty quick through that, but it is a very important concept. No questions on that? So here's the eye chart that gives you the details on the box. This slide, of course, will be available to you after this session. I'm not going to go through each one of the different boxes here and what they mean, but this will break you through what are all the capacities. It's basically, if we're talking about, where are we over here? The B6, 7K, 1.5 HD ports per core. On standalone, 2.5 HD ports per core. The 1000, 96 HD, and it breaks down in here, and you see how much larger up the CMS 2000 will get you. In all of the examples here, we're talking about 720p 5 content, so that brings down the port capacity for video. Did I leave anything out, Abjit? I did.
Yeah, I think you covered everything.
I'm sorry?
I said you covered everything. Yeah,
oh, yeah. So now, I'll step back and we'll talk about that architecture. I want to go back to the points I was making where the CMS 2000 is complementary to the CMS 1000 within the architecture, and that's something that Abjit is going to go into in a lot more detail than I did.
Yeah. So just to add what Albert already said, so the key thing that we want to differentiate here is, if you see, it's if you're using a standalone VM, which means that you don't have any other applications in the same hardware, then basically you get better port to core ratio. This is the only thing that we want you to understand. For example, if you're using hardware platforms like B6K and B7K, then basically this is what you get. This is what you need to know for a capacity planning. Now, here we quote only B6K and 7Ks because that is what we test. It doesn't matter, it doesn't mean that you cannot have any other hardware and have multiple platform, multiple applications. It's just that we have to make sure that this is what you get if you have any other applications. And apart from that, the smallest VM that you can create and run a CMS software is 4 cores. You cannot run anything under than 4 cores. Okay, so in Cisco Meeting Server, it's the same software and you can have multiple functionalities in the same software. So we have categorized the software capabilities in 2 different sets. The first is the Cisco Meeting Server core services, which is basically my conferencing, internal on-premises gateway capability, XMPB, and the CMA registration. And the second category is the edge services, which enables firewall traversal, mobile and remote access for the CMAs, which is the desktop client, the WebRTC connectivity, and if we are integrating with Office 365. So if we are trying to understand how we have different modules in Cisco Meeting Server, and why do we have different modules in Cisco Meeting Server? So the first module is, of course, we have the call bridge, which is basically the conferencing engine in Cisco Meeting Server. What this means is, like, we can have any call control, SIP or 323, and we can have endpoints dial into the call bridge, and that basically are the participants in a conference. And we can also connect the link front-end server to the call bridge and basically route the link participants to the conferencing bridge, which is the spaces. The second component, what we have, is the database. So all the spaces that we create and the individual configurations for different spaces are actually getting stored in a database. This database can be installed with the call bridge, or we can have a separate server with just the database. The reason we have these components separate is we might need to have more number of call bridges, but we might not need every call bridge to run a database service. And the other reason is the call bridges they work in active-active redundancy, whereas the database is always an active standby redundancy, which means there is just one master database and all the other databases are just the slave. We can sync the users using Active Directory. That means all the users in Active Directory, they get their spaces created. The other component that we have is an XMPP server. This component basically enables the Cisco meeting apps or the WebRTC clients to join and register to the CMS server. So these are all the components that create the core component of the whole deployment. Now let's look into the external components. The first is the turn server, which is basically the firewall traversal for SIP or the CMA applications. The second component what we have is the web bridge. So this module basically enables the WebRTC participants to connect to the Cisco meeting server. The other component is a load balancer. So basically what this does is if you have redundant deployment, which is more than one CMS servers running different XMPP server modules, then you can use a load balancer and then basically pick up the XMPP server that you want to pick. We do have APIs that control each and every module of this, and all these components are secure within each other. So even this particular module is talking to some other module, we can choose to have certificates between them. Now, the server can be deployed in multiple ways. First is the single combined server deployment, which means I have all the components in the same server, and I use all the components internally, which means these are the core components, these are the edge server components, but it's a single server. Now I can choose to deploy it in a single split server deployment, which means I have multiple Ethernet interfaces. On one interface, Ethernet interface, I might be listening for these messages, and the other interfaces, I might be listening for these particular messages. So it's the same physical server, but I have split it up. So we can have this particular component in the DMZ, this will be inside, and then we can use this. So now let's go into a little bit of a scalable deployment options. So as I said that we can enable different modules depending on what is the requirement. So I can have multiple servers running either the same components or maybe different components. So for example, in this example, I have an XMPP server which is only located on one of the CMS, and all the other components are in a redundant fashion, right? So I can choose to install this, and I can choose to install the separate CMSs for different conferences, or I can choose the CMSs as an overflow. So for example, if my conference is going beyond the port capacity of the server 1, I can basically have a cascade link, and I can have the overflow going on to the second conference box. So the next question comes is, which module do I need to enable what capability? So I'm not going into detail in all these because at the whole presentation we will be talking about these. This is just a reference slide. So for example, if you just want spaces, then these are the components that you need. If you don't want CMA, then basically you don't need these. So things like that. Any questions we have in this? Okay. So now let's talk about the certificates. All the components can have either self-signed or a public CA signed certificates. The recommendation would be to always use an externally signed CA certificates with an exception of clustering for the database server. We cannot have self-signed certificates when we are clustering the database servers. For all the other components, we can have both of the certificates, either self-signed or publicly signed. But the recommendation would be to always go with the publicly signed CA certificates. Now let's look into the DNS requirement. So the DNS requirements are again dependent on the modules that I enable. So the first three DNS, the first two SRV and the A records are basically for the XMPP service, which is the Cisco meeting application or the WebRTC application trying to register to the Cisco meeting server. The first one is how a client discovers the server. The second one is how servers discover each other in XMPP federation. And third is an A record for basically the SRV records. The other example is for the web bridge. So web bridge is the component that enables the WebRTC component to log into the CMS server. And this is basically, this requires a entry on the DNS server. The other example is for the call bridge, which is actually the conferencing core. And we need this kind of A record for that. The other is for the MMP interface. MMP interface is a command line on the Cisco meeting server, which is used to enable or disable the modules. It is also used to configure which port or which Ethernet interface the particular module will be listening on. The last two records are for link integration. So the first is the SRV. Either I can use a FE pool or a single FE server, and the second is the A record that the SRV will be using. any questions in this? Yeah.
How does it work with the Java installation with the XMPP server SRV? If I have the same domain for Java and I want to use the WebRTC client, that's why I have to make other subdomain for CMS? Or?
No, you don't have to make a subdomain for that. Why would you need a subdomain for that? No. So it depends. So you can either choose to have a subdomain or you can use to have the same domain, and I think you can use a different port number for that. Okay. Any more questions do we have? Okay. So there are 4 different ways in which we can configure the Cisco meeting server. The first is the command line. This is basically used to enable the modules and configure the ports that they are listening on. The second is like the GUI, for example, configuring the LDAP source and certain configurations on the spaces. The third is the APIs. Almost everything can be configured using an API. And the fourth option is the SFTP. So this is basically used to upload licenses or upgrading images or the certificates. So let's talk about the new things that we added in the Cisco meeting server. So here the latest release that we are talking here is the 2.1 image. And the first thing that we added is like the improved experience from a Cisco collaboration endpoint. We have added the support of active control, and because of that, the layout changes, and there are certain benefits that we can get, what we used to get on a TelePresence server. The second improvement is like the conference experience. So we have added something like call bridge groups and load balancing. Because of that, we have improved the conference experience. We are on a first step where we can use Cisco Expressway and have certain of the capabilities of what CMS Edge used to have, and we'll be talking about that as well. Licensing enhancements. Previously, if we are having an ad hoc conference, we were always using SMP Plus licensing, but with the 2.1 release, we can be using the PMP Plus licensing if it is an ad hoc conference. We have added a new capability of streaming from 2.1, and there is an increase in the scale, and I'll talk about how adding call bridge groups and load balancing, we can get a better scale in a conference. So let's get into call bridge groups. So in a nutshell, call bridge groups and intelligent load balancing, they work together. It's introduced in 2.1. What we can do is we can enable load balancing of call bridges within the same location. So call bridge groups is created to have different CMS servers if they are located in a same location. So I can have a cluster of, for example, 4 CMS servers, and 2 of them are in US and 2 of them are in Europe. So I can create 2 call bridge groups where I can have cluster CMS 1 and 2 in US in a same call bridge group, and CMS 3 and 4 in a UK in a different call bridge group. And I can load balance between the same location CMS servers. So other requirement, if you are using the call bridge groups and intelligent load balancing, is the round trip time should be 100 milliseconds within the same location, which is within a call bridge group, it has to be 100 milliseconds. And for the cluster, the same time of 300 milliseconds works, which means if I have in 2 different locations, for them to be in a cluster, 300 milliseconds is absolutely fine. And we do use these concepts, route patterns, groups, and lists to configure, and I'll be talking about that. So let's take an example that what happens in a conference without the call bridge groups. So in this example, I have a call manager cluster, and I have 3 CMS servers in the same location. Now, if the first participant dials, for example, 100, which is the dial ID for a particular space, then it checks the route pattern. It finds out that for 1000, we have to go to route list 1, which is route group 1, and that is actually directed to the trunk to the first CMS. So now the call manager routes the call to the first CMS. So we have the conference 1000, and there is the first participant. Now when the second participant dials, it checks the same configuration, and we have configured it in a circular algorithm, which means the first call goes to the first trunk, the second call goes to the second trunk, and the third call goes to the third trunk. So in this scenario, what happens is the third participant is redirected to CMS2. The third participant, when they dial, it's the same process, but now we redirect the call, we direct the call to CMS3. So what's the problem? The problem is it's a 3-port conference, and we are using total 9 ports to have a 3-port conference. So if we don't configure it in a circular algorithm, the challenge is all the calls go to the CMS1, and when we hit the port capacity, the CMS keeps allowing more participants and keeps reducing the quality of the conference, which we don't want. We want to use all the different servers, and the problem is in most of the cascaded conferences, there are a lot of these cascaded links which can actually go more than what we actually need. So how do we solve this problem with the call bridge groups? So if we have a call bridge group, which means all these CMS servers are part of call bridge 1. So the first call comes, it checks the configuration, and the call is routed to CMS1. Now when the second call comes, what happens is it checks the configuration, it sends the call to CMS2, but then CMS2 checks with the CMS1, and it knows that it's the same location, and CMS1 is already running the same conference. So it will send a message to the call manager, and it will ask the call manager to redirect the call to CMS1. The third scenario, when we have the third participant coming in, it's based the same configuration. It should ideally choose this third CMS3, but basically the CMSs will talk within each other, and they will know that the conference is already running. So it will redirect the call to the first CMS. So what's the benefit? The benefit is a 3-port conference in a same location takes only 3 ports and not 9 ports. So this is the first benefit that we get if we are using a call bridge group. Any questions on call bridge groups? Okay. So we'll just look into how the message exchange works. So in this scenario, if I send a SIP invite, and we have to see that there is already a conference running for MySpace 1 on this particular call bridge 2. So the SIP invite goes to the call bridge 1, and it checks with the other CMS server that the conference is running, and then basically it will replace the conference IDs, the call IDs, and it will send a SIP invite with replace. So another thing that we have to see is this particular capability is not supported in VCS today. So for the whole call bridge groups and the load balancing to work, it has to be a call manager deployment. So the moment when we support this capability on VCS, even the VCS customers can take the benefit of call bridge groups. So when the call manager gets the SIP invite replace, it basically sends it to the endpoint, and the endpoint sends the call directly to the second call bridge. This is kind of the message flow. So let's see a little bit of a complicated deployment and how to configure it to make the best use of call bridge group. So in this example, I have 3 call manager clusters with their individual CMS servers, and we have an SME in between. So all the local calls goes to the call manager, and all the external calls go to SME. I have no idea of the other clusters. So in this, what I do is I create 2 separate CSS, the calling search spaces. The first is used to take care of my local calls, the calls that get originated on my call manager. The endpoints that are registered to my call manager, when they initiate a call, what happens is I pick up the route pattern, I send it to a route list, and this route list has got 2 route groups. The first route group is actually listing all the CMS servers in the local domain, in the local cluster. And the second route group is actually pointing to the SME call manager. So what this means is just because it's a circular fashion, and now with the load balancing and call bridge grouping invoked, it will first consume all the ports in the first CMS, then it will consume all the ports in the second CMS, and then it will consume all the ports in the third CMS. And when I get a reject from this CMS, I will basically send the call to SME. And then that SME is going to send the call either to this call manager cluster or the other call manager cluster. This is how we handle the calls on a locally originated calling search space. Now, if we have, so now let's take care of the calls that are coming from the SME. So the same scenario, if the other cluster has utilized all the ports and if they're routing the call to my cluster, how do I handle that call? I have the same route pattern and I have a route list, and there is only one route group, which is the CMSs on my local cluster. So the second scenario what we have here is like if I don't have a SME in the picture, which means I'm trunked, it's a full meshed trunk between all the other call managers. So the only difference here is for the locally originated call, I will have the same route group with all my local CMSs, and for the other, I will have a route group where either I'll use this first call manager or the second call manager. In the previous example, we had an SME call manager here. In here, we'll have the list of all the other call managers. And the calls getting originated from the other call managers, basically they will go directly to the local CMS route groups. Any questions on this? Okay. So the next concept that we added in CMS is the load balancing. So without this load balancing, the challenge with CMS server was, for example, if I have a conference bridge that has got 10 ports, and if I have already used 10 ports, and if the 12th or the 13th participant dials in, it's the nature of the CMS to add those participants and reduce the resolution of all the other participants who are already in a call. Which means if I can have 10 HT calls, and if I'm adding 2 more participants in it, then basically the resolution of the HT conference goes down. To make sure that that doesn't happen, we have added something called max load limit. So if I have set my CMS server on 100% max load limit, then once I hit the max load limit, I don't accept any other calls. I reject the calls. This is something which was not available without the call bridge groups with load balancing. Then we added a couple of more thresholds. First is the existing conference threshold, and the other is the new conference threshold. I want to have a flexibility where I only pick a call bridge or a conference server for new conferences and for existing conferences. Maybe for existing conferences, I want to pick up a new conference bridge at 80%. And maybe for an old conferences, I'm okay and I'll be picking up at 50%. So we are giving more configurable parameters so that you can choose and make use of this. So just to understand how it works, in this example, I have a call manager cluster and 2 CMS. They are in the same call bridge group. And in CMS1, basically, I have just one space, which is using only 3 ports out of the 10 ports. So this CMS is a box that supports only 10 HT ports. The second CMS has got 2 different spaces, A and B, and they have 3 and 5 conference calls, ports being utilized out of 10, which means they are running at 80%, and my load limit configuration is 80%. So now if a new conference comes, it sees that CMS2 is already at load limit, and basically it will not accept that call, and it will check with CMS1. If CMS1 has not reached 80%, it will ask the call manager to redirect the call to CMS1, and the call gets connected to CMS1. So this is just a load limit, standard load limit configuration. The other 2 scenarios what we have is for the new conference and the existing conference. So in this example, I have a load limit of 80%, but a new conference limit is 50%, which means if I've used 50% of ports, the new conference doesn't start on the local CMS server. It starts on the next CMS server. So in this example, I'm starting a space C, which is basically a new conference, and I have already hit the 50% in the CMS2. So it will get the call, it will check the limit, the call will get rejected, and it will be redirected to the CMS1. The third scenario is for the existing conference. It's the same logic. It will check the configurable parameter, and then basically if it meets, it will reject the call and ask the call manager to redirect the call. So a little bit of configuration on what do we need to configure these parameters. We have added these new objects called bridge groups. So basically you create a call bridge group, and within the call bridge group you can make the configuration. You can choose to have either load balancing enabled or disabled. If you enable these, you can set up the maximum load or a new conference load or existing conference load. If you don't set this up, then basically you don't get that flexibility. You keep adding calls and you basically reduce the resolution. So you have a configuration option. Now the configuration of load limit is from 0 to 100%, and there are defaults that are already set in the CMS. So if you haven't changed it, the default for total limit is 80%. So which means if you have a CMS server with 10 ports, and if you have not made any changes in this configuration, so the 9th port will never happen on your CMS. So you might not think that something is broken, it's just that the default configuration is 80%. So the first thing would be just to go and make it to 100%, so that you make use of the 100% of the capability. The default configuration for a new conference is 50% and existing conference in 80%. So even if you don't configure it, these are the values. The moment you enable this, this will get enforced. So any questions before we start the next section? Okay.
A couple of questions that have come up in the Spark room.
Okay, I'll just check them.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for the questions and the feedback we're getting in the Spark room. Please keep using that. We will answer that as quickly as we can. You saw I picked up on a few of them. Others that we may not get to right away, we will be getting information on that as time goes by. As Abjit mentioned, that Spark room will be open for 2 weeks. We'll get you the answers in there. But Abjit, a couple of questions that came up around capacity, all the port capacities, 720p versus 1080p, that kind of information. So I think that's something that we may come back and touch base on a little bit. Another one that you might have visibility on that I don't, we can answer it later in the Spark room, but is there configuration guides for TMS in a fully redundant configuration for the TMS, not CMS? Okay, so yeah, we will get to those questions as quickly as we can. But again, any questions up to this point at all? Okay, active control. So this is something that is new in CMS, supported with CE 8.3 on the endpoints. Okay, so this is as of 2.1 on CMS, and 8.3 is required on the endpoints. So what you'll see is the interface that will show up at the endpoint. That's new with CMS. So for example, we can drop a particular participant from the endpoint. Now, this is something that has been done in the past via API. As you know, as you probably know, the CMS has a very robust API set, but this is done via CMS and the CE code. So you can also change the layouts at the CE endpoints. This is something that is also something of note. He's touched on a couple of examples on using the API for configuration. A lot of this information, a lot of these features are turned on via the API. There are quite a few features that we will touch on, and we'll point out where we can to get you an idea of where the API calls are to make these functions work. But I would highly suggest taking a look at the API guide for the specific details into the API calls that you would want to modify your systems with. So, recording and streaming. How many of you are familiar with the CMS recording application, with the recording solution? Just a little bit, I'm surprised. Now, are you aware that as of 2.1, there's a streaming solution as well? So, previous to CMS 2.1, there is a recording solution built into CMS. As of 2.1, CMS provides a streaming capacity as well. Both of these features fall under a single license. So if you buy a recorder, 10 recorder ports, you're getting 10 recorder or stream ports and mix match. I want to start out by saying that because if I don't jump out there, I don't want to take a chance on forgetting and not telling you that. That is a separate license for recorder and streaming, and it's the same license based on ports. Okay? So we'll touch a little bit on it. So on the recorder deployment, what comes out of this, it'll be a 720p 30 H.264 stream. Supports 64 KB AACLC. On the box that you apply the recorder service to, we're going to be using getting 2 recordings per physical core with 16 physical cores maximum. Okay, so that's just a math exercise. I posted a document on the scalability deployments or scalable deployments on CMS in the Spark room. There is information on the details for the recorder, not only in that document, but in the release notes for each release since 2.0. Also required with the recording solution is that NFS server. That's a separate NFS server that the files are stored. Once you configure the recording gets streamed to that NFS server. We recommend that you're going to be using about a gig per hour. It is variable. I can't give you specific, this is a table for recording and streaming. Since it's VBR, that can vary, but we do recommend a gig per hour. So what happens is, as Abhijit mentioned with the architecture, the call bridge and XMPP server are tied to the recorder server. So this is just, now the recorder server isn't another specific server, it's another CMS instance that has the recorder on it. Previously, and this is something that shows up a lot, previously in documentation, the recommendations provided for you to have one server where the recorder and call bridge are co-located. And in those previous releases, it stated something along the lines of used for small deployments, used for lab purposes only. That moving forward, we're going to strongly recommend that the recorder server is separate from the call bridge. Okay? The NFS server is a separate server. Now that is an actual separate server. So what happens is the recorder service acts as an MPP client. Once a call is launched, and yes, this is one of those that will be configured via the API. Once a call is launched that has recording on it, however you set up the recording functionality, you can set it up to record automatically. You can set it up to start with DTMF tones, things like that through the API. Once that stream is initiated, it sends it down to the NFS server. At that point, that is an MP4 file. At this point in that architecture, that's just an MP4 file on an NFS server, and it's up to you how that is going to be distributed. It'll just be there. You can use a file system. You can set it up on a web server somewhere, provide a portal to that. However, CMS does not have anything to do with that part of the solution. It just provides the origination and endpoint for that MP3 file. Now, as of 2.1, you'll notice this architecture is very similar. This is a streamer. So again, both of these have that recorder licensing. You're going to have the XMPP server and call bridge matched to the streamer service. That's going to be 2 separate servers, 2 separate VMs. They could be, but however, they cannot be co-located. The XMPP, call bridge, and streamer cannot all be co-located. Okay, does that make any sense? Am I saying that, am I confusing that there? So, now what happens with the streamer, Much like the interaction that we described for the recorder, where you've got, you write an API call to begin the stream, to capture the stream, the end result is an RTMP to an address. That's a standard RTMP stream, so that means anything that accepts that can play that. So things like YouTube, Wowza, things like that, they will support it. However, we are testing and have a partnership with vBrick to provide the next step in that solution. And what that will look like will be something along those lines. That's what we just described. You've got the XMPP call bridge pair with the recorder sending to an NFS. You've got the XMPP and call bridge paired sending to a streamer and getting that RTMP address. If you want to complete a solution, take it from architecture to adding value, we're working with vBrick to provide that access. We have a end-to-end solution there for the customer. Whereas previously we would just bring the architecture to provide the content. With vBrick, we'll be able to take that one step further and add value to our customers. One thing that I didn't mention that comes up quite a bit, especially on the recording, well, specifically on the recording, is without the vBrick solution on the back end of that, there is no metadata in the stream. So when I said it's dropping off an MP4 file, that's what it's dropping off. There's no metadata. However, working with the vBrick solution, they do add some special sauce, if you will. I hate using that term, but they do add something to it where they pick up information and use that as metadata to be able to distribute it on a portal, through the ref, things like that. One thing to point out, in both cases, you can have multiple streamers, again, paired to an XMPP server and a call bridge, and it'll use round robin for redundancy within the streamer. So it picks one, finds it available, sends a stream to that streamer. If that particular one isn't available, finds the next one, sends it there. Does the exact same thing with the recorder. And as we mentioned, we said a couple of things with the APIs. These are the new functionalities, the new commands available to enable streaming and recording. So yes, you will have to have API calls or an API specialist to write the APIs to provide this solution. Any questions on that? Yes, sir.
So what does it encode video for?
I'm sorry?
In terms of layout, what does it encode?
I'm sorry, I still didn't hear
The
it.
layout of the conference, the video portion of the conference, what does it encode? In other words, what's the layout that it records or streams out?
I'm still not picking up the Abjit.
He's asking what is the layout that will be recorded.
What is the, oh, okay, what's the layout that will be recorded? Okay, thank you, I wasn't picking that up. So the question being, the stream that is being recorded, the coming out of the conference, what is the layout? That layout is whatever the layout is of the conference. So remember, you've got the pair of the call bridge and XMPP server, and then you got the recording service or the streaming service to that call bridge pair with XMPP. It acts as a client. Well, when you write the API calls to initiate that, you're going to pair a conference to a recording action or streaming action. So whatever that layout is what will be streamed to the recorder or the streamer.
You can create a separate profile and you can choose the layout that you want to have, and you can have that layout as getting recorded. So if you want, you can choose it like a single, or you can choose to have like all equal, and that's what you're getting recorded. So you can configure it. You can have multiple templates.
Specific to the streaming session, not to the conference itself. So the participants get one view, you can have a second view.
Yes. You can either have a default for everyone, or you can have a separate one for the recording in the stream. So maybe you can have multiple.
So for example, if you have a training session and you just want it to get recorded in a single view, you can do that, a separate instance, or you can have like an all equal and you can choose to record that.
And what if you've got content shared? Same thing?
It's the same thing.
So it's however the layout.
Exactly, yes.
It's just a single stream.
Yes, it'll always be a single stream. Because it's a single MP4 file, so.
Now, what's important to note, I talk about the vBrick. I went from architecture, this is the architecture for the streamer or the recorder, and that drops you off. It drops off the MP4, drops off an RTP address, and no metadata. So that is the file, that's the stream, that's it. vBrick takes information from the CDRs off the CMS. It does quite a bit to create metadata so they can go a little bit further with providing a solution. Now, one thing that we haven't said, we are in the world of solutions. So we haven't talked about Microsoft Interop. We are right now covering streaming. The booth that we have set up for CMS over at the World of Solutions, on one side of the table, we're discussing specifically the solution with vBrick recording and streaming, and on the other side, we've got actual examples and demos for everything with Microsoft Interop. Yes, sir.
Does the streaming include the text, so that I am messages in there as well, or is it just the content and video?
You know, I'm really having it sound's just dying here. Could we possibly get the microphone out, or because I picking up just a little bit of.
It was about the XMPP feed, so does it pick up the text in the streaming as well, so the IAMs chat in the conference in the space?
Yeah, sorry. There we go. We get the microphone.
Hi
I
there.
have to apologize. I've got some hearing damage that's giving me a
all
hard
right.
time.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure can.
So the question was around the stream, and does it pick up all the IM presence chat in the recording, in the stream? Or is it just the video content and video stream?
I am really glad you asked that question. So the question, as I understood it, was since we talked about the XMPP server, what is that interaction in terms of IM and presence? Was that along the lines of what you mentioned? So I'm glad you asked that question because I want to clarify that. In all cases here, the XMPP server is for media and registration only. It is not part of IM and presence at all. The XMPP server is not used in any way for IM and presence, not only in this part of the solution or any other part of the solution in CMS. XMPP server is there only for media and registration of the clients. I'm really glad you asked that question. How many of you thought otherwise? Yeah, we get asked that quite a bit. It's like, well, the XMPP, IM and presence. Well, it's not. I'm really glad you asked that question. Thank you. Any other questions on that? Did that make sense? How many of you were surprised by that? I saw you shaking your head, yes, because that is a really common misconception. So, I do want to encourage you to stop by the World of Solutions. We have TMEs as like Abjeet and myself there to show you the recording and streaming in Microsoft Interop. We also have folks from vBrick there to show you the vBrick side of that. Okay? So, branding. How many of you are familiar with the branding functionality in CMS? So that is another feature that requires an additional licensing. One thing that we do want to touch base here, I'm just going to gloss through this pretty quickly unless someone has a question. As Abjeet mentioned, this acquisition, last time we were here for Cisco Live, it was still Akano yesterday, Cisco today. What you'll see now in branding quite a bit more is it is now clearly a Cisco product. The branding has all changed. You've got different voice prompts. It's gone from you've entered an Akano meeting to you've entered a Cisco meeting, things like that. Now, we still have all of the same functionality. We still have multiple branding available. We have multi-tenancy branding. You can also you can brand the IVR prompts. You can brand the clients. You can brand the WebRTC splash screen. Okay, so that is all there. There's just new sections to it, and that is another API-dependent functionality. Abjeet had a slide early on. It's one of my favorite slides where he had a screen cap of an API, it had a screen cap of Postman, so on and so forth. Those are all parts of configuring a solution, the CMS solution end to end. API is more and more integral to the configuration and deployment of a CMS. It offers quite a bit of flexibility.
Are there any plans to support localization without having to buy a very expensive branding option?
Are there plans to be able to play this without the expensive branding option? Yeah. So I have not heard of any changes to that. I mean, we do have the licensing option. I don't know that it'll change in terms of how it's licensed.
Because that's the only product where you have to pay to have any other language anymore. I've never seen that before.
I've heard quite a few. So the point he's making is that it's the only part of the product there that's charged differently for languages. I've heard that statement before. I don't know that there's plans to change it.
Yeah, so far we don't have any plans, but all the product managers are aware of that and they are working on that. So this is a feedback that we have already got and they are working on it. Yeah,
if you would do me a favor, maybe you post that question in Spark, right, and we'll kind of point up to follow up with other folks.
Yeah.
Make sure I don't take too much time here. On-screen text. Also new functionality in 2.1. We heard, so I get to talk to people within Cisco and the sales organization, some customer meetings, things like that. There were quite a few requests, and I was actually, in my own mind, I was a little surprised how important it was to customers, and that is to have on-screen messages during a conference. 2.1 brings that in. So here are the featured functionality of that. You get one message at a time. The duration of that message being on screen is configurable. The position, top, middle, or bottom, is also configurable. This seems to be a very important feature. I am glad to be able to say, yes, we have that now, because a lot of folks have asked for that. So here's a couple of examples. Two things to note here. We mentioned where it's located is configurable. There's top, there's bottom, and there's middle. The other thing to note here that I think is very important is, like, seriously, dude, clean up your lab. You got to clean up that lab.
Yeah, but that's a waste of time, right? So I just leave it.
He was very focused on providing this content for us. Again, like some of the other things that we've just talked about, this is all configured via the API. I'd kind of like to get a little bit of a feel for what your opinion is of using the API for more and more of the deployment here. Of what I've heard, people love it. People are getting used to it. That is the way it is. I kind of was wondering, what kind of feedback y'all have. I see kind of some smiles. I don't know if those are smiles because you're finding things to throw at me or you're good with it, but what are some of the opinions on that? Sir.
So, in general, I would say API is brilliant if you've got a bunch of programs or programming mentality. For implementation guys, it's a pain in the backside. So if you expect a tool, an interface, web interface or something that you log into, right, I need to configure this box for this customer, blah, 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 done. Right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to do it through the API, I mean, it's very flexible, but doing it just with the API for me is you haven't finished the product yet.
So that's a very valid feedback. So the only challenge is that when we acquired this, that was the way they did it. So we had two options: either we integrate it first or fix the GUI. So now we are at a position where we have all the major feature set that customer can accept in a call manager environment, Cisco environment, and we are working on a tool in parallel which would be out in maybe in a couple of months, and that would be like the solution for all the configuration related issues. But today, yes, it is going to be API based. So we are trying to come up with more contents so that understanding of API becomes a little bit easier, but unfortunately, that's all what we have now.
We will make sure we get that info back. Was that a question or just, okay? I thought we were waving.
On the GUI, will there be options for an operator to have more influence in the conference, to give certain endpoints, to force a certain video layout, for example, to a certain endpoint, or even to set a different firing video for a certain endpoint?
You relay, I'm not picking all that up.
So I think what the question is like you are expecting something what the MCU offered, you know, more like, so it's never going to be what MCU does because it does really good what it does. But we do have certain things that we have planned, for example, making someone important and adding a couple of more layouts. So
from the way he's answering this, I know what you asked. Not because I heard you, but I know what you asked. And an hour and 20 minutes into this and it just comes up, I'm a little shocked. Yeah. So I don't mean to cut you off, but just from what you started answering, I know exactly what he asked. Let me repeat what you asked so that other folks over here know what we're saying, and then let me know if I'm right. So I think that the expectation is something along the lines of what we're used to being able to do with MCUs. Things like change layouts, make speaker important, mute, drop individuals, things like that. And when is that coming to CMS? Was that about what you asked? As soon as he started answering, I knew what that was. So what the question being is the white glove type functionality that's available, you know, for MCUs that we're used to having seen for a long time. It's currently not there in CMS, and I think what he was looking for is when will it be? So as Abhijit was mentioning, it's not going to be a function of the MCU. That's not going to happen. It's also not going to be a function that's ported into TMS. There are projects, there are products being developed that are going to do that type of CCC type, the Conference Control Center type functionality with the CMS. That is underway. I don't have targets for that. I don't really know all of what the commits are on it, but that is coming. Yeah, I could tell as soon as what you started saying, I knew what that question was. Anything else on that? How many people are glad to hear the one that I keep hearing over and over how important it is, make speaker important. Everybody seems to really love that feature. So hopefully y'all are glad it's coming. It's one of the first ones coming. And you're not going to need the API to configure it. So, a couple of other features that we kind of lumped them into, you know, a small, here's other features, but again, these are features that we've heard over and over from customers and partners that are important, that hopefully you're glad we're getting it in there. So host and guest pins. As of 2.1, you can define 2 different types of pins per conference. So you'll have a host pin or a guest pin. That's not been available. Also falls under the category of things that we're used to having from MCU days. Multiple CDR receivers. We can have up to 4 CDR receivers now with the CMS. Disconnect active calls. Calls are automatically going to be ended when the CMS detects no media over 60 seconds so that you don't have that open forever conference. PMP licenses will be used for ad hoc conferencing. Solution architecture. Any questions on those features there? Now, Abhijit, I know we didn't have this scheduled to take a little break, but we've been going about an hour and 20 minutes, and I know I need to go to the restroom. Can we possibly take about 10 minutes, unless y'all want to plow through? Maybe a 10-minute break? We good with that? Because it dawned on me, it's like, this is the first session, everybody had lots of coffee, and we've not had a bathroom break. I'll be right back up.
maybe we'll have to run with the mics, or I can take the questions. That would be more easy.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good part of being into,
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to assist first to see what you were saying. I mean, to see also the type of question, because people over the same doubt in mind.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
I
I'm
see.
expecting the.
I see.
Your space, no, I'm part of mine.
Okay, you can join this.
Yeah, I can join. Yeah, that's true.
It's 2803. BRK code 2803.
Can you just add me from here?
No, you can join in from Spark. Just search for BRK COL 2803.
Yeah.
It's just the name of the session.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Scheduled, but it was very important to me to take that little break. So we recognize we've got 25 minutes left. There's a lot of content still to cover. So if there's something we start moving a little too quickly on, please slow us down, especially me. I tend to talk fast anyway. But anyway, let's get started with the solution architecture. So the solution architecture, as part of the entire solution, we've got call control. We require that. We have a standard SIP trunk and 323 interwork. We need that from the outside. That's not a functionality directly of the CMS. We're going to get that from the outside, a call manager or VCS along those lines. The collaboration edge, we've talked about that, and someone asked about it in Spark, and I promised that we'd be getting to it, and we're going to be talking about that now. So the collaboration edge, the Cisco meeting server edge is definitely still there. And we are definitely moving more and more to the expressway edge. I'll get into that into a little bit more detail and hopefully cover the question that came up in Spark. Scheduling, we can schedule for a solution with the CMS in terms of using TMS as well as Outlook. Meeting applications. So the Cisco meeting application is still a big part of the solution. We've got the PC application, we've got the WebRTC application, and a suite of applications for mobile devices. Video endpoints, while part of the CMS itself is there's not a video endpoint like a la Movi or something along those lines. It supports any standards-based SIP device, as well as 323 if it's SIP interwork before it comes in. Now, the edge itself, the Cisco meeting server edge access, as of 2.1 and going forward, mobile and remote access for CMA can come in via the edge. With Expressway 8.9, Link 0365, and WebRTC, as of right now, feature preview functionality in 8.9 and CMA 2.1. The WebRTC client can come in through X8.9. Someone asked that in Spark. There's the answer. I'll show you a picture of that here shortly. This is what Abhijit's already gone over, so we won't spend a lot of time on the geo-distribution calls. The much better cascading, instead of a full mesh across, in this example, of 5 bridges, we created 3 call bridge groups, so there's some economization on the bandwidth for the cascades. It takes a lot less cascades for that full mesh. That's what Abhijit was describing earlier. So instead of having the individual call bridges, we've got groups, and that full mesh has the multi-stream SVC among it. The important part is in terms of our customer, in terms of the end user, they're in the same conference. there's not a different experience because you're on one call bridge group or a different call bridge or a different area in the country or in the world. It all will be the same conference. Now, this is the base architecture for video. So the Cisco meeting server sitting here, it's performing the core functionalities. There's the thick client, the CMA. There's the edge. This would be the thick client external, WebRTC coming through Expressway, E going to the C, which can branch off if you need a cluster if you need functionality of call manager, and all of it going back up into the core. That covers, I think, the question, one of the examples, one configuration that would cover that question that came up in Spark earlier. So on-premise video centric, this just breaks it out a little bit more. We've got the CMA thick client coming through. That still today comes through the CMS edge. The full software client, not the web client, the full software client, external, still comes through the CMS edge into the core. This particular deployment here is most recommended if your customer or if you only need video. If your primary focus is this to be an on-premises, video-centric deployment, not a lot of UC, not necessarily a lot of Microsoft interop. However, this is something that Abji pointed out earlier. There's a couple of other breakout sessions. Please, if you want granular details in what I'm about to cover, you can refer to those. That's specifically what those entire sessions will be covering. But let's go ahead and touch base on the interop. How many of you are aware of or can understand or have seen the differences between a dual-homed conference and a gateway conference with Microsoft? That's something very specific. That's something that I really want to make sure I get clear across here. The types of calls that you can perform, that you can use the CMS for, you've got a gateway call where the CMS provides a connection between standards endpoints and link. It's the CMS that does the gateway. You have spaces, rendezvous conferences. Those are always on meetings that are sitting on are configured into the CMS. They're always available. They are not consuming ports until they're in use. So I think Abji touched on it's almost unlimited the number of spaces you can define on a CMS. The ports are not reserved. They're not consumed in terms of licensing or port utilization until the conference is actually being used. Okay? And that space can be reached via Skype or standards devices. So if I've got my Tuesday space and you're on Skype, you dial the address for that and you come in. If you got a standards device, you dial the address for my Tuesday space and you come in. That would be, the entire conference is hosted on the CMS. That's a gateway call. The dual home conferencing, and I'll show you the pictures there. Pictures tell 1,000 words, but I'll try the 1,000 words anyway. That is two actual conferences, logically one conference, therefore dual homed. Let me show you what the difference is. So this first example, we're going to go point to point. On a gateway conference, the CMS does the interworking between the link side and the standard side. So link dials an address for the standards device, CMS gateways it across. Same comes the other way. So if you go standards to link, CMS gateways that. Okay? That's a gateway call. In terms of spaces now, this is multi-point. This is the space that's defined in the CMS. Now we're going to dial that from link and standards as well. Everyone meets in the same conference on CMS. That's a gateway experience there. So take it through another example here. One of the questions that comes up, I've got a TelePresence server. Does that mean while I'm migrating, I can't use them both at the same time? Not the case. In this example, what I'm showing you is we got link devices dialing a conference that's being hosted on a TelePresence server, coming from the link side, going through the CMS core, pointed over to the TelePresence server, and then you've got the standards devices, and they'll be in a conference. So just to kind of summarize, I've shown you gateway calls point-to-point, gateway calls hosted on the CMS space, and now in this example here, it's a gateway call to where the destination is an MCU, a TelePresence server. Dual homed. This is quite a bit different. This is a very, very strong feature. I think this is a real differentiator between us and everyone else. So in this case, I've got some standards devices. I've got, of course, Skype over here. That's the on-prem link front end for the customer. That's customer-owned front end server. And of course, we've got a CMS. So now I dial from the link devices, the click to join for Skype. So now all of these devices, all the link devices, are in a multi-point conference on the link server. Now, though, we dial from the standards devices. They meet, go back one. The standards devices dial the conference that ends up on the CMS server, but then once that is recognized as one of the link conferences, this intelligent multi-stream cascade is built between the AVMCU and the CMS, hence the term dual homed. Does that make sense? Am I doing a good job explaining that? Logically and experience-wise, it's the same conference. Physically, two separate conferences. All of the Microsoft devices are on the link side. All standards devices are over on the CMS side. Now, why does that make a difference? So what you'll notice here is previously on, you might not have seen it, I didn't point it out, but you might have noticed that the image on the link side was a composited image of the conference coming off the CMS side. Since it's a gateway call, it's only one stream of the entire layout coming back to Skype. The difference here is the multi-stream. This is the actual individual streams coming from the link server to the link client to the Skype client as individual participants because it is multi-stream. Same going back the other way. So this layout is determined by the space on CMS. This layout is the multiple streams coming from the AVMCU, whether it's CMS or Skype. Much better experience. And one of the biggest strengths to this, one of the really big strengths in my opinion, is no one had to do something different because they were using the CMS solution. And what I mean by that is the invitation, if this was scheduled through Outlook, the invitation would look like this. And using the Skype plugin, if you're a Skype participant, you click on Join Skype. That's something you do anyway. You didn't just have to retrain your users, okay, this is a dual home conference, you have to do this, this, and this, or if you're on a standard, you have to do this, this, and this. No, this Skype participant does what he's used to doing, he or she's used to doing. Then you've got voice information. If you've got a voice deployment as well, there's a phone number to join that same meeting. The standards devices dial a URL or they hit an IVR to go into the same conference. So the three individual types of participants have used the exact same workflow to join a conference, and they were in an interop call between Microsoft and CMS. Add to that, the WebRTC client goes to a URL as they are used to doing. Any questions on that? Anything I didn't explain well? No? Please stop by the World of Solutions. We can show you in real time. Think you're up, or should we go through this?
You can continue. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
You can continue.
Yeah, actually, I do want to talk about this. Sorry. Going back to the edge. So we start out, we've got an on-prem video-centric deployment that includes Skype for Business. This is all on-premise. This picture that you see here is basically where we left off when we were talking about the architecture in general, right? Without Skype. So now I'm going to add Skype. So we've got the front end on-premise that has a trunk to the CMS. So Skype participants can join the gateway call or dual home via that front end. If the customer has Skype participants and they have a link edge, they would come in from the link edge to the front end and back down through that trunk to the core. So that's on-prem, Microsoft on-prem, customer-owned front end. You'll notice this does not go through the CMS edge for the Skype interop. Another possible deployment there is, now I have the front end coming in off the VCSE cluster. This is part of what's new in the edge solution of x89. Skype users come into the front end, trunk to the VCS cluster, the VCSC cluster. Skype for Business users out in the cloud still come through the link edge to the link front end to the VCS cluster. WebRTC has dropped down into the VCSE cluster in this picture. I don't remember the name, but somebody asked that in Spark. I think this is the answer to that question, unless I didn't completely answer the question. So what you might ask, what's different from this picture to this picture, where the edge, I'm sorry, where the link edge goes to the front end going to the CMS core. In this picture, the link front end goes to the VCS cluster. The difference being there is if you want to get all the functionality that you get with the Expressway Edge, IM and presence coming across between Skype and Jabber, for example, you have to go through the Expressway to get that. The previous one is going to be video-centric, complete interop, not complete interop, Microsoft interop, video-centric on-premise. This picture, the difference being you're using the Expressway and you get all the robust functionality of the Expressway. Again, you know, I'm sure, like I said, it's a fair question. Okay, why do I need that Expressway? Well, I just give you one example, the difference being UC-centric versus just video-centric on-prem. Well, the VCS, I'm sorry, has a very robust interface, very robust edge capabilities, whereas the CMS has this type of dial plan that you can configure, just, if you will, the basics to get from one point to another point. This is the configuration available for you in CMS. Whereas in Expressway 8.9, you can get into a much more granular configuration. Add to that, the stated direction is we're going to the Expressway Edge. Today, the configurations that I showed you using the CMS Edge for those particular scenarios, absolutely supported. Absolutely supported. However, this is where we're going. The objective is one edge, everything consolidated into the Expressway. No questions? And try to give you the time. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't rush through that. I really wanted to get that to you. I'm hoping that no questions is because you got the information and not because I just skipped through too fast. Please stop me if I didn't. The Spark's right there. And with that, up to you.
Okay. So let's go to the next section, which is scheduling. In scheduling, what we offer here with CMS is one button to push, early join, and auto extend. The initial release of TMS didn't support clustered CMS call bridges. Now we do support the clustered CMS call bridges. Just a little bit of understanding of how the scheduling works. So in TMS, when we book a conference, what happens is there is a configuration where we say this is the range of call IDs that we want for the TMS scheduled spaces to have. The moment we have that configuration on TMS, what it does is it logs in into the CMS server and creates conference spaces in this fashion. So every time when we create a conference, it will pick up the conference, the space from this for that particular scheduled conference. So that is how basically a TMS scheduling for CMS works. Now, the one button to push looks exactly the same. Either it's a CMS conference or it's a Microsoft Skype-based conference. In Skype, we create a conference using the extension, Outlook extension, and we create, and basically the information is picked from the CMS server. It can be added in the invite, and this has the link for either dial-in information or the WebRTC information. The one button to push looks exactly the same if it is a Skype call. Migrations. So in this section, what I'm trying to show here is like even if it is a MCU customer or a TelePresence server, basically I have some charts that shows the differences between spaces and CMRs. We would recommend to go with spaces until unless you need a CMR hybrid, or if you are very much used to the user-based provisioning what CMR on-premises offers, or else everything else can be supported and is working on CMS spaces. So there are a couple of tables that basically differentiates is like what you get if you migrate from MCU to CMS, and the features that are the same, and the new benefits that you get or the things that you lose if you are an MCU customers. For example, the layouts and the layout placements is something that is not supported on CMS. So these are basically tables, and you can just go and look. The configuration, the bare minimum configuration is you need to have to this version of CMS, which is 2.1 and 15.4. Ad hoc conferences, you have to use TelePresence server conductor when you're adding it as a conference bridge. There are similar charts between TelePresence server, what's new, what is the same if you have a CMS server, and what is it that you lose. So what we lose is CMR on-prem, hybrid, and the multi-streaming capability. But multi-streaming is something that we have planned for a future release in CMS. But CMR hybrid, like I mentioned, will never be available on CMS. Multi-party licensing. So I'm sure most of us already know about the multi-party plus licensing that we introduced. So when we didn't have the CMS server, we had a personal multi-party and shared multi-party licensing. Personal multi-party is for the users, and shared multi-party is for the users that are either not entitled for personal multi-party licensing or are room-based systems. Now we have something called personal multi-party plus. The only difference is we have added the Cisco meeting server. What a personal multi-party license means, it means it's a named user-based licensing. It means one conference, n number of participants across n number of hardware. So it's just one license means one conference. The second license is shared multi-party licenses. The addition is you have Cisco meeting server as part of this. If you buy it with a room-based system, you basically pay almost half of what you pay without it. We have added a couple of packs, which is TMS Starter Pack and SMP Plus Starter Pack. So TMS Starter Pack is for customers who are CMS only, and SMP Plus Starter Pack is for customers who are Conductor and TelePresence server-based customers. Because what we offer here is Conductor licenses and Skype interop. In TMS Starter Pack, we don't offer that because in CMS, you can directly interop with Skype, and you don't have to pay an extra license for that. This is a little bit of a detail. I'm sure there is no new information in this, and we have nothing changed in this. The only difference is for PMP Plus, there has to be a minimum order of 25. For SMP Plus, you can order just one. And like I mentioned, SMP Starter Pack is for TelePresence server customers, and TMS Starter Pack is for CMS customers. The major change what we had in this release is ad hoc conference participants will now consume PMP licenses, PMP Plus licenses. Initially, the first release 2.0, it was an SMP license consumption. So this is a chart that says either if the call is between CMAs or CMA to video endpoints or CMA to Microsoft Link endpoints, as long as the CMA has got a PMP license with it, it will always use a PMP license. And the scenarios where either it doesn't have a PMP license or there is no CMA in the conference, then basically it will use SMP plus licenses. So if you have a customer who has a question that I have this scenario, it's a gateway call or a conference call, what license do I get? Then this table will basically give you the answer. So with this, I'll conclude my presentation. And the main key points that we want to understand here is the Cisco meeting server is not completely integrated with the Cisco solution, which means I can have an ad hoc conference, use the right amount of licensing, I can have a scheduled conferences, I can support single or clustered CMS servers, and I can have a scheduled personal meeting spaces, which is basically personal virtual meeting rooms. Cisco meeting server continues to improve Microsoft interop. With every release of Expressway, we are moving more and more CMS functionalities into the CMS Expressway. I think Albert already mentioned what the first release is bringing in, and the next releases we are going to add more and more. The new features on Cisco meeting server improves the experience. Call bridge groups and load balancing basically gives you better flexibility of how the calls should be handled, either rejected or allowed. And like I said, Expressway today it supports WebRTC, which is like a preview. The reason it is preview is because we have some open caveats. So if you're deploying Expressway, make sure you understand the caveats. If you're okay with it, go ahead and install. But just keep sure that Expressway is going to be the edge platform. So maybe today you're with CMS Edge, but start making arrangements so that you can move to the Expressway. And CMA is still not supported on Expressway, and it is supported on Edge, and maybe in the next release we are going to support it on the Expressway. So if you have any questions, you can ask either on the Spark, or we are available here, or in the World of Solutions, we'll be there for all the 2 days, and you can ask any questions. And we would like you to come and look at the interop and the conferencing experience that we are showing in the World of Solutions. So with that, we thank you for coming here and attending this session, and we hope that you enjoyed and you have all your answers. If not, please use the Spark room and we'll be answering all your queries.
Please fill out the survey. This is important to us.